Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dan Mahr. He was a professor of entomology and extension specialist at UW-Madison for over 30 years, and he has grown cacti and other succulent plants continuously for over 60 years. He served as president of the Cactus and Succulent Society of America and has received the Honorary Fellow and Special Service Awards. I'm so excited he's here to share his knowledge about desert roses. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for the introduction. And yes, I call this the flamboyant succulent because a lot of succulents are known because of their interesting shapes, but not necessarily their flowering. Desert roses have both interesting shapes and beautiful flowering as well. The plant is technically known by its genus name, Adenium. The common name desert rose is very misleading, primarily because most of them don't live in deserts, and they're certainly totally unrelated to roses. So hopefully we'll make some sense out of that as we go through here. Adeniums or desert roses are fairly new in the horticultural plant world. If we think of some of the other types of plants that we grow commonly, I don't know, maybe daylilies or African violets or roses, they've been in cultivation for literally many hundreds and in some cases thousands of years. There's records of true roses going back in horticulture as long as 3,000 years ago. And apparently the Chinese were hybridizing them about 1,000 years ago. Adenium, on the other hand, is very, very new to horticulture from that perspective. It was only in the 1970s that the plant really came into cultivation, and that was primarily only by people who were specifically interested in cacti and other succulent plants. And there is a little bit of diversity in the genus, and so people started selecting better cultivars and varieties, say in the 1970s and 1980s. And then hybridization started pretty significantly in the 1990s and into the 2000s. So really we're talking about, from a horticultural perspective, and especially a horticultural perspective for a general audience, we're looking at plants that are really only 30 or 40 years old. So they've come on the market in a big way in recent years, and they show up in a lot of our stores. And so I thought it would be worthwhile to give some background information and talk a little bit about how to cultivate them, because certainly you will find them in outlets there in Wisconsin. My wife and I moved away from Wisconsin back to our home in Southern California about 4 years ago. And at that time, they were certainly showing up in the better garden centers and even the big box stores. So the program is going to be broken into about 3 sections. I'm going to spend most of it just giving you a kind of an easy introduction to the genus Adenium, what it's all about, what it's related to, where it lives in the world. Then we'll go into cultivation, how to keep it alive, how to grow it successfully, and then a little bit on propagation at the very end. So that's going to be the roadmap for the presentation. The genus Adenium is actually in the milkweed family. As I mentioned, they're not roses at all. They're more closely related to literally I'm talking about Wisconsin or the United States, the milkweed family, the Apocynaceae. And yes, I mean milkweeds like we grow in the garden or that grow naturally in Wisconsin. And if you picture these later in the summertime, after they've been pollinated, you'll see that they have a very distinctive fruit or pod, which is oftentimes horn-shaped, and sometimes they're called seed horns or seed pods. And the Adeniums have a very similar sort of structure. And if you look between the black arrow at the top and the white arrow at the bottom, you see a pair of elongate, what we call seed horns, or technically those are called follicles. And those will develop and mature, and the seeds will be inside of those. And so that's kind of part of the milkweed family, can be identified by those seed horns or seed follicles. Another factor, and again, if you grow milkweed in your garden, you're familiar with the fact that the seeds have a tuft of hairs on the end. And this is another characteristic of some of the members of the Apocynaceae, the milkweed family. This is an Adenium seed and actually has a tuft of hairs on both ends. And these are like little parachutes the wind picks up and helps in distributing the seeds to other parts, to other areas. So just a couple of ways of identifying the fact that these are not in the rose family at all, but in the milkweed family. This is a map of where the genus Adenium occurs in nature. It's a small genus. There's only maybe roughly around 8 or 10 species, and scientists are still trying to work out the classification of some of these things. Some of them occur in parts of the world that are not very easy or very safe to travel to. And so it's hard to get representation of some of them to do research on. But the majority of them occur on continental Africa, starting in Southern Africa, South Africa, working our way up through on the East Coast, Mozambique and Tanzania, and then into Kenya, and then the Horn of Africa, primarily Somalia. And then if you go north of that into the Arabian Peninsula, there's a couple of species there. And then there's another species, which is one of the most dramatic. It's a huge individual. The plants are huge plants that occur on the island of Socotra off the coast of Somalia. It's actually part of Yemen. Now, when we talk about the desert roses that are in cultivation, we're really talking about varieties and hybrids of one particular species, which is Adenium obesum. And it's called obesum for a reason, because it's succulent and it's fat, it's obese. So this is the fat Adenium. And that's comes from the area of East Africa that I've got marked there in blue. However, the other species that are surrounded have been used in hybridization programs as well. So this is what a little young Adenium looks like. By young, I mean maybe 10-year-old plant, and this is probably in about a 10-inch pot. And the stems are very succulent, and it is a leafy plant. A succulent plant is defined as one that can store water through dry periods, either in the leaves or the stems or the roots. And with Adeniums, they store water in both the stems and the roots. And a lot of succulents, Adeniums and others, have a very large inflated base where the stem joins the root. And that inflated base is botanically called a caudex. And species that have a caudex are called caudiciform plants. And that's a very common group of many, many different unrelated species of succulents are caudiciforms. But this is kind of what kind of a shrubby looking desert rose would look like, not at peak bloom by any stretch of the imagination. But here's another one. This one's a little bit more upright, but again, you can see the fattened stem at the base. There are some species that grow into small trees, and therefore they tend to be more upright in their form, have more of a central leader. I'll show you pictures of some in habitat in just a second here, but this is a seedling of a more upright form. And others tend to be much more shrubby. They don't get very tall, maybe only a couple of feet tall in nature, but their caudex in nature can get huge, can get up to maybe even 2 or 3 feet in diameter for a very, very old plant, but they tend to spread out more rather than grow upright. So there's a variety of different body forms and body shapes amongst the species. And when we look at the hybrids of the various species, you can come up with almost any combination of these. So here's a species, here's a Adenium obasum in Kenya and southeastern Kenya. That big glob that I've got my left hand on, that's the Caudex, very, very old plant, probably a couple hundred years old or more. Some straggly stems and leaves that you can see there. And the picture here on the left is a picture from that plant in nature. The flowers are between 2 and 3 inches in diameter when they're fully open. And then the same species, Adenium obasum, in cultivation here in the United States, the picture on the right. Here's one of the tree species. This is Adenium somolens from Somalia and then down into Kenya as well. And this gets up to, probably about 10 to 12 feet as a small tree. But again, you can see the caudex, how big and fat the trunk is. And this is what that species, a flower of what that species looks like in cultivation. A third species that I've seen in nature is Adenium bomianum. This is the southwesternmost species. It occurs in the countries of Angola and Namibia on the western side of southern Africa. It tends to be, most of the plants you see tend to be quite shrubby, but very, very old plants will grow into small trees as well. And whereas the Adenium obasum and the Adenium somolens flowers that I showed you were bicolored, red and white, bomianum is a species that has a fairly uniform flower color, pale pink to pale purple with a deeper colored throat. And again, the diversity in flower color is one thing that hybridizers use to come up with different forms in cultivation. Another aspect of the succulent nature of Adeniums is that they store water both in the stems and in the roots. So this is a picture of 4 seedlings, young plants. The plant on the very right is 2 years old. The plant next to it is a 1-year-old seedling, and the 2 plants on the left are 3-year-old seedlings, and they are in 3-inch pots to give you a size perspective here. So what we're going to do is take them out of the pots and lay them side by side. So again, you have the 2-year-old on the right, the 1-year-old next to it, and two on the left are the 3-year-old plants. And you can see the enormous roots that are developing already on these very, very young plants. And so that's part of the water storage capacity, but that is also something that we can use aesthetically in growing these for their abnormal shapes and their unusual shapes, is that as these things age, we can gradually lift those roots a bit out of the soil, and then you have a structural caudex or a structural base to the plant, which is very appealing to a lot of people. Now, these are very, very florific plants. Adeniums are just a couple of hybrids here to show you how they can be these are young plants, probably no more than 4 or 5 years old, and how really rich they can be in flowering, even as relatively small plants. Now, one of the handouts that you'll have access to electronically is a slideshow of a variety of primarily hybrids and cultivars that are available. And I'm not going to go through all those, but just a couple of slides here to give you an idea of the diversity of what you see, what hybridizers have been doing in literally just the last 20 or 30 years to produce this diversity of things. The slide presentation that you'll have access to, these are all named hybrids and cultivars, and those slides will actually have the names on them. So if you get really excited, you could try to find the exact same cultivars. They are commercially available by various nurseries here in the United States and overseas. And just to give you a sense as to how popular these are currently. I had the opportunity of visiting, sorry, we're going to go back. I had the opportunity of visiting Costa Farms in Southern Florida a few years ago, and they were gearing up for the Easter market. And this is what 250,000 Adeniums by one grower looks like. And if you look in the foreground, you can see the fat little bases and the great variety of colors. These are all hybrids, and because they're hybrids, hybrids can only be propagated true, not from seed, but from cuttings. And in order to get a cutting that has a good codex or good base on it, then they have to be grafted. So literally, these are all grafted by hand. And then these are all prepared to go into the mass market, and they're shipped all over the country. So let's talk about cultivation now. And there's a variety of factors, as you would have with any plant, in order to make these things thrive and prosper. We'll start with temperature. None of our species are truly hardy. There are a couple of species that will take a degree or two of frost as long as they're dry. The problem with they tend to get root rot very easily when the temperatures are cold and the soil is moist. And when the roots rot, then the rot rapidly moves up into the caudex and up into the main stems, and you can lose a plant very quickly through root rot. So that's one of the things that we try to avoid in cultivation is we try to keep them as warm as possible, and we try to make sure that they are not wet. The soil is not wet during cooler periods. So their ideal temperatures, these come from kind of not truly desert, but warm environments, equatorial types of environments, and where the temperatures are oftentimes up around 90 or 95 degrees or even warmer. So ideal growing temperatures for them are 80 to 95 degrees. I grew these for many years when I was living down in the Madison area, and they absolutely love our summer conditions in Wisconsin. They like our warm days. They like the thunderstorms. They can take adequate moisture as long as they're in active growth and the temperatures are fairly warm. And so they actually thrive in our summer times very, very well. But they're not plants that you would plant in the garden because they wouldn't survive cold conditions. And so they would be grown as container plants and plants that when the temperatures start to cool off in the fall of the year, then you would move in the house and let them go dormant. Most of them drop their leaves. Many of them drop their leaves when they go dormant in the wintertime. And then they'll tell you when they want to start growing in the spring again. And then when the temperatures warm up outside, then they can be moved back outside. As far as light conditions, they grow in nature in full sunlight and in full bright sunlight, intense sunlight. And so they really need good sunlight, and good sunlight in Wisconsin means giving them as much sunlight as you can. If you can give them, say, 4, 5, 6 hours of direct sunlight during the growing season in the middle of the day, that would be ideal for them under Wisconsin conditions. They can take more than that. They can take full sun day long. And I grow them here in Southern California. I grow them in full sun throughout the day, and they can do fine. Young plants can sunburn. So we want to be careful and protect young seedlings in particular. But then as they mature, we want to move them into stronger and stronger light so that they have a good compact growth. And the strong light is also important for good flowering as well. When you move them indoors for the wintertime and then back outdoors in the summertime, you want to relocate them carefully and provide some sun protection for a week or two until they get adapted to brighter and brighter light. Otherwise, even mature plants, older plants, can get some sunburn on the caudex, on the stems. Potting soil should be well drained. This is to keep the roots from being totally saturated soil. If you want to use commercial soil, you should add additional drainage material to a commercial potting mix. Your potting mix can be any commercial type that you like. Preferably, it would not have vermiculite in it. If it has peat in it, the peat tends to hold a lot of moisture and eventually will break down. So I would recommend repotting every couple of years if it's a peat-based type of potting soil. There are commercial cactus and succulent soils that you can find out there. Unfortunately, very few of them have an adequate drainage material for the really highly succulent species. And therefore, even if you were to get commercial cactus and succulent soil, I would add soil amendments for good drainage. Drainage materials can include any of these. And I do have a written handout, which will also be available. And these things are listed in there as well. But here's some examples that were available to me in Wisconsin. So if you look around, you can find them. The baked clay is something that's used in the hydroponics industry. So if you can find a horticultural supply company that provides for the hydroponics industry, you can find that. Gravel is just from the local decorative gravel yard. Poultry grit you can get from any feed supply store. It comes in different grades and different sizes. The horticultural pumice is not something that's easily available in the Midwest. It's a Western product, it's a volcanic product, but it's very, very commonly used here in Southern California by succulent growers. Perlite is a little bit more commonly available, and it comes in a variety of sizes and grades. Now, if you take the perlite out of this and mix everything else up together, this is what you get. And literally in Wisconsin, this was my soil mix. I never used any organic matter in my succulent mixes, only because with the plants being outdoors during the rainy season, I wanted really good drainage. Of course, this means that I have to fertilize it a little bit more often because there's no organic matter in the soil to provide any of those nutrients. So this is an example of what will happen. This is a 1-gallon nursery container, and the roots have grown so big that it's literally split the pot. But you can see my potting mix in the crack there. And if we extract this from the pot, this is what the potting mix looks like. Again, there's no organic matter, but you can see that there's a very, very healthy root system of fibrous roots, as well as the very large tuberous roots, as are kind of partially hidden in this picture. As far as watering, during the growing season, when it's warm, they can take an abundance of water as long as there's good soil drainage. And in my plants in the summertime, if we didn't get rains in Wisconsin and the weather was hot, if the weather was up in the 80s or 90s, I could water my plants every 2 or 3 days. It wasn't necessary. They are succulents. They're capable of surviving drier periods. And so if you wanted to water only a week or two, that would be adequate. Be careful watering. Even in the summertime, we can get our cool, cloudy periods, and just hold off on watering until it warms up and the sun comes out again, and then you can continue watering. They don't like to be watered during their dormant period, which is 4 to 6 months in the middle of winter, from late fall into early spring. And so water very, very lightly, even only maybe as much as once a month, just to keep some of the feeder roots alive. Otherwise, if they are leafless, there's no transpiration that will get the moisture out of the soil, and they'll just stay around the roots, and you can get root rot in that fashion. So avoid overwatering, use a well-drained soil mix, promote a healthy root system, maintain a good root to soil ratio, and plenty of water in warm, sunny weather. As far as nutrients, they do benefit from some fertilizer, kind of a low nitrogen fertilizer. If you give them too much nitrogen, they grow spindly, and too much nitrogen will actually reduce their amount of flowering. So something like a 10-20-20 or a 10-20-30 ratio, with the first number being the nitrogen. If you can find something in that area, that would be a good fertilizer for them. Fertilize them only during their growth period, during the summertime, from spring into early fall. And you can fertilize once or twice a month, whatever you want to do there, but only use about a quarter to a half of the fertilizer strength that is recommended for houseplants, because too much fertilizer will just make them put more energy into growth and less energy into flowering. Any type of container is okay, as long as it's got a drain hole. When you're repotting, don't overpot. You want to make sure that the roots fill up maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the volume of the new pot. Otherwise, there'll be too much moisture in that soil where the roots aren't, and that can cause problems as well. Many succulent growers find the root system to be structurally appealing. If you go to a cactus and succulent show, which we have a lot of out here in the Southwest, oftentimes the prize winners are the ones that have the most elaborate root systems that have been raised on display. So this is the plant I showed you earlier. And if we take the rocks away or take the soil away, you can see the root system there. If we kind of prune back that root system, this is what we see. The arrows here from right to left, this was the original soil lines. The first one is at germination. The second one was when it got potted up into the 1 gallon pot. And the third one here is my repotting, but I've pruned away a lot of the fibrous roots so that we can see the structural appearance of the thickened root system of the caudex. And then when you pot it up, this is what it can look like. So this is something that's done pretty frequently. You can raise it 1 inch or 2 every year. That caudex will continue to enlarge, even though it's above ground, and it'll eventually turn into a very interesting plant. Some people take these and manipulate them, put them into bonsai pots, and they're kind of pseudo bonsai, with the trunk, if you will, actually being the root system of the plant. Repotting about once every 1 to 3 years, depending upon the size of the plant, the size of the pot, until you get it into a desired size. In tropical areas, if you go down into Florida, you can see these things in 10-gallon pots. They're huge plants. That's probably not something you want to deal with when you have to move them in and out all the time. So if you just keep them pot bound, then they just don't grow as much. They don't grow as fast. And you can keep them a little bit more manageable as far as moving them. Pruning is not really necessary unless you want to reshape them somehow. Some of them have a very, the stems tend to be very weak, and they'll droop. If you want them to be looking more upright, you can prune them back a little bit, and that'll strengthen them a little bit. Also, when you prune the stems, if you prune off one stem, you will usually get two or three new stems growing just below where that cut was. So that will increase the bushiness, and the more stems that you have, they flower from the tips of the stem, so you'll eventually end up with more flowers as well. And you can also prune them just to strengthen the weak stems. So these are two seedlings, 2-year-old seedlings. The one on the left has a little bit more tree genetics in it, so it's more upright. The one on the right is more of a shrubby one, and the stems are so weak that it doesn't even support the weight of the flowers. And so the flowers hang down, they're just not very attractive. I took this picture just a week or so ago. It's still blooming, but when it does finish blooming, what I will do is I'll make a cut right about where this arrow is, and then it will rebranch there, and it will be just a little bit more of a sturdy shrubby type of plant. They do have pests and diseases. Root rot that we've already talked about is the primary disease problem, and it's just a matter of improving your soil drainage and reducing your watering. As far as insects, it's primarily mealybugs and spider mites, which are the bane of most any house plants, and they would be treated in the same way as you would treat them on your house plants as well, whatever works for you. Okay, I'm going to finish up with just a few words on propagation, primarily seed propagation. They can be they can be propagated from cuttings, but it's a kind of a difficult process, and there isn't a really high return rate on them. So cuttings aren't used very much, except for in grafting. In grafting, they will take a cutting as small as maybe only an inch of stem tissue and graft that onto a fat seedling base. And that 1-inch stem will eventually then form into a very, very nice kind of typical looking flowering plant in a matter of just a couple of years. So grafting is an important way that the nurserymen in particular propagate these things. Seeds are a fun way of doing it. You can get seeds on the internet. A lot of hobby growers will produce seeds and sell you seeds. The only thing to keep in mind is most of these things are hybrids, and the seeds will not look like the parents. So oftentimes if you get seeds off of eBay or Etsy, for example, they may show a picture of what the mother plant looks like. Don't expect the seedlings to look like that. It's like any other type of crossing. There will be some of the father's genetics and some of the mother's genetics and the grandparents' genetics, and so the offspring, the hybrid offspring, may look like most anything at all. And that's kind of the fun part of growing from seed is you may know what one or two of the parents look like, but what you get actually to get out of it is quite fun, quite different. Also, commercial nurseries, particular overseas nurseries, will sell seed, hybrid seed, and they're hybrid seed mixtures. And you can get 100 seed for maybe a few dollars and grow them up, and then you get quite a diversity of different types of results, flowering results. I do a lot of growing. I do my own hybridizing, and I grow from seed, and I get nursery seed as well. I start with a potting mix of any commercial good potting mix. You want it to be fairly fine. And then I mix that with fine perlite, 50-50, just to provide some additional drainage for that potting mix. You want to sow the seed in spring to early summer because you want them to get mature enough by the end of the growing season that it'll get them through the winter. Sow the seed about 1/4 of an inch deep. Takes about 5 to 10 days for germination. You want to keep the soil moist during that germination period, and then after the germination period as well. Moist but not saturated, because these seedlings will damp off or they will they will rot if they're kept too wet. I grow mine in plug trays, which I'll show you pictures of in a minute. You can sow all your seeds in pots if you want to, just on the surface of a pot, and then put a quarter of an inch of soil over the top and then keep it moist. And then the seedlings are usually big enough to repot at about 12 to 18 months. And these will go usually into about a 3-inch pot by that age. So this is a cell tray, and they're 2-inch cells. And these are seedlings that are about 3 months old. And then these are seedlings that are about 6 months old. And a little closer picture, and you can see as the caudex is already starting to grow very nicely on these young plants. And then this is a tray of plants. It's about a year old. These are at about the stage of for transplanting. And they pop out of these cells very nicely. And then you can just put them into a pot. And I put them into 3-inch pots. And these are seedlings that have been in these pots for about 6 or 8 months. So the seedlings are probably about 1.5 to 2 years old. And again, they're in 3-inch pots. So you can see they already have a very, very nice caudex on them. Some seedlings start blooming in their first year, literally at about 1 year old. About a third to a half of them should bloom by year 2. And you'll have probably 80 or 90% of them blooming by year 3, and the remainder will bloom in, say, year 4 or 5. And this is just part of my bench showing a diversity of different sizes of seedlings that are growing right now outside. Sources of plants, garden centers, especially garden centers that have a good selection of cacti and succulents, will have these. They may have the true species, Adenium obesum. Chances are more likely that they will have hybrids. And sometimes those hybrids will be named. So it's just a matter of looking around. The big chain stores, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, the IKEAs, Walmarts, especially in the springtime and summertime in Wisconsin, that's when these plants are coming up out of Florida, and you'll be able to find them then. They may not have flowers on them, so you may just get a caudex. And so again, it'll be a little bit of a mystery when they first bloom. There are specialist mail order nurseries. If you just do an internet search, you can find Adeniums being sold online. I have bought from Logis, which has both a mail order catalog as well as an internet access. That's one that I've gotten plants from. These are all grafted hybrids. And there's a nursery in Florida called Top Tropicals that I've gotten a lot of grafted hybrids from as well. These are all blooming sized plants that they offer. And there's an overseas nursery that is producing lots and lots of new interesting hybrids. It's called Orient Adenium. If you order from them, they provide the permits. You don't need any USD import permits. They provide their own permits as long as the orders are fairly small and not of a commercial size. Information sources, there's a very, very nice website by one of our American hybridizers, Dr. Mark Dimmitt in Arizona. If you search the internet simply for Dimmitt Adeniums, you'll find just a wonderful website with lots of information. Mark Dimmitt and some of his Arizona colleagues have also written a very nice little book called Adenium, Sculptural Elegance and Floral Extravagance. And you can find that if you do an internet search for it too. Lots of good information on cultivation and the history of these plants and cultivation as well. Just a quick word of caution, like a lot of the plants that we grow, plants don't like to be nibbled on by things. And so over the years, they've created toxic chemicals. And Adeniums, many Adeniums have a toxic sap in them. And so if you're pruning them or if you're handling them, commercial growers, nurserymen handle these things day long and they don't have any problems. They know how to deal with it. But if you do get sap, don't rub it in your eyes and wash your hands. And I've been handling these things since the 1970s, and I've never had any problems. But just use a little bit of caution and care, and you'll be fine. And with that, this picture of some hybrids, you'll notice that some of these are single petaled in nature. Adenium obesum, all the Adeniums have just a single petal, but the hybridizers have been able to produce doubles and multiple petals as well. So there's quite a diversity of things to look at. And with that, Julie, I'm done.
That was wonderful, Dan. I love it. They're so beautiful, and you gave us a lot of great information. I think even for a beginner, just to get started and give it a try and follow your tips and recommendations. So thank you for all of this wonderful information.
Well, thanks for putting all this together. And I know you're going to give them access to some internet information that will have my handout and will have my PowerPoint presentation. And I know that this was done kind of unusually. It wasn't done live because of technical problems. So if you want to give my people my uh, email address, that's fine. If people do have specific questions about adeniums, certainly they can send me an email and I'd be happy to answer them.
That would be great. Dan, why don't you just say what that email address is?
Yes, it's DLMAHR at WISC.edu.
Perfect. Thanks again so much, Dan. I appreciate it.
No problem, Julie. Thank you.